Hi everyone. Today I thought I would just have a kind of a chit chat with you. I thought once in a while I'd just do a kind of informal chat like this and share some thoughts and something more personal with you, and also update you with my life for those who are interested. So some of you might know that I have started yoga teachers training, and it's been a month now. So I've done 2 full sessions in the past month. A full session is basically an entire weekend and starts from Saturday morning, 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock Sunday evening. And 2 full days back to back. So obviously the first weekend I was extremely nervous and I didn't know what to expect. I've done yoga for quite a few years now, since 2012, on and off. But yoga training was totally brand new to me. I didn't know what I was expected. So I went in kind of thinking maybe everybody was going to be really advanced and kind of super athletes. They can do, handstands and backflips, etc. But to my surprise, pleasantly, I went in and I started chatting to people that arrived early. And I realized that there's people from all walks of life and different shapes and sizes, different ages, and they all have kind of different goals. I mean, obviously, we all have the same goal as to obtain the skill in order to teach people yoga. But they're all coming from different places. There are probably about 20 people, 20, maybe 25 people in our class. And the majority of people I've chatted to, they seem to have done other things in their lives and then decided yoga was their path and this is what they wanted to do, hopefully for the rest of their lives. And I'm yet to meet someone who's kind of graduated from college and decided to do this. So I think yoga by nature is something that you have to grow into it rather than kind of ambition, like a sport, that you want to do since you're a little kid. So that was my observation. In the first couple of hours, we had to kind of share kind of our motivation in terms of why we wanted to become a teacher, really. And I have to say, not everybody was 100% sure they would be teaching. I think it's more like a calling. You do it without a very, very clear goal necessarily. You just know that this is what you want to do, and you kind of trust whatever happens. I think a lot of people just go in thinking that this is going to benefit them in some way, maybe personally, and then if they're able to teach, then that's a bonus. And that's kind of how I was thinking as well. Even though in the back of my mind, I knew that teaching would be the most effective way in terms of helping people. But, it doesn't matter if it doesn't happen. It's not a goal. The goal is to go through this process, and wherever I come out, it's just the way it is. To my surprise is how quickly we start to go into, teaching techniques and stuff like that. Within the first week, we were doing, adjustments in terms of how to correct somebody's poses. As a practitioner, I always knew that yoga is not static. It's not something that, if you do it correctly, then, it's good. I kind of knew that there wasn't such thing as good yoga poses and bad one. I mean, obviously, you could say that if you do in a way that could potentially injure yourself, then that's not good. But otherwise, it's your body. You know your body best. At least yoga is a way for you to connect yourself with your body, so you get to know it better physically. But also through the lectures, it also reminded me that yoga is not just what you do on the mat. We call it asana. It's not just the physical side of it. There's also kind of emotional and a mental side of it, which is probably equally important. We talk about bandha, which is kind of a different energy points and locks in the body, etc. And to be honest, I have practiced yoga for quite a few years, and I never really learned about these things. When teachers say something like engage bandha, I always knew that, it's something to do with sucking your belly so you don't just flop out. But to understand it in terms of where it came from, and there are different kind of energy points in your body, it was just fascinating. As I said, the first week I was extremely nervous. So by the end of Sunday evening, I was flat out. I was absolutely exhausted. Not physically, because we only do like a 2-hour asana, like a physical yoga in the morning. And the rest of the days, yeah, there's some physical poses we had to do. But mostly it was, a mixture of lecture and also learn to teach others, kind of practice on each other. But mentally, because I was like this as I went in, I wanted to learn everything. So by the end of the first weekend, I was just so exhausted. But it gave me a very clear taste of what it would be like teaching and also be on a course. So what I did was, initially, there are different lengths of courses you could do. So in terms of curriculum, they're identical. There are 12 weekends, that's 200 hours you have to do minimum to be qualified as a teacher. But you can decide how long it would take you to complete all those training sessions. And because I had no idea what it was going to be like, so initially I actually chose the longest period, which is 1 year. So that breaks up into kind of once a month. But by the time I finished the first weekend, I had a taste of what it was like. I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to wait for another month to experience this. I couldn't wait to go back. I was exhausted by the end of Sunday evening, but by Monday afternoon, I was thinking, well, I couldn't wait to get back to the second session. And so I thought, well, okay, so 1 year is probably too long. The first session was extremely useful because I was able to kind of gauge my own ability in terms of physically and also mentally, how intensively I can go into this process. And so I decided to switch course by the end of the first session. I actually applied for a shorter, more intensive course, which is 4 months. So I'm still on a waiting list. I hope I will get a place. If I do get a place, that means that I should be qualified by end of the year, by Christmas. So there's something to look forward to. So with a 4 months course, it means I'll be training 3 weekends out of 4 each month, which is pretty intensive. And you probably have noticed the training sessions, they're in the weekends. This is so people can still have a day job and then do the trainings at the same time. So they don't have to kind of, have to choose one or the other, which makes the whole thing could be potentially more risky for a lot of people. So for those of you who maybe are thinking about doing the same things, that it's doable. It's totally doable. You don't have to stop your current job or career in order to pursue this. So I've just finished the second training session, and I was so surprised by the end of the second training weekend. We were practically teaching half portion of the class. So a typical class kind of broken into 4 parts. You have the warm-up, you have the standing, you have the sitting down, and then you have the closing part of it, leading up to Shavasana, which is kind of just lying down, resting. And we were teaching practically half portion of it. And this is only the second weekend. I was so thrilled and surprised. In the beginning, everybody was nervous because it's one thing going to a class, being able to understand an instruction. It's quite a different story, having to give out that verbal cues and knowing what to notice and what to correct, and to give out, cues in the right time and right place. And also the physical adjustment as well, which is extremely interesting. And this is kind of fascinating area of yoga class. If you've been to yoga classes, you probably have teachers that kind of come to you and move your body in some way, and that's called adjustments. And this is where it gets kind of interesting and or controversial even. There are a couple of yoga gurus, extremely powerful yoga gurus, like the guy who invented Bikram, the hot yoga, and also the Ashtanga, which is, the majority of yoga teachers follow in terms of principle of the movement. So both the Bikram guy and the Ashtanga guy, the Ashtanga guy he's passed away a few years ago, but the Bikram guy is still alive. Both of them have been accused of inappropriate sexual advancement on students. And obviously the Ashtanga guy, he's already dead. But his grandson recently came out and acknowledged the fact that there was something untoward actually happening. And I've seen some photos of the training sessions, and you can't really mistake that as anything else other than sexual harassment or assault, really. And Bikram guy, he's been accused of inappropriate sexual conduct on his female disciples. So because of all of that is going on, and it's caused a kind of big stirs, because it's really disturbing, it makes physical adjustment slightly more sensitive. I think in the past, yoga teachers felt quite comfortably to go and adjust students and say, well, move your bum over here or your leg over there, and then, kind of physically manipulate your body into a certain way. And we were taught the techniques in terms of how to perform that. But at the same time, it was quite a sobering kind of reminder that it is a better practice to kind of ask before you start the class and go, well, if anybody doesn't want to be touched, please raise your hands. And I've actually only seen one teacher so far, and I go to tons and tons of classes. I've only seen one teacher actually verbally ask that. Occasionally, some yoga teachers, they would give you a little essential oil massage around the head or shoulders or something like that. They will ask, well, anybody who doesn't want to be touched, then, let me know. But to be upfront before you start a class and say, well, if you don't want to be touched, raise your hands. When I first heard that, I was kind of slightly taken aback, because I always perceive yoga being a very physical process. I mean, it's very vulnerable. When you go onto the mat, you're literally naked innerly. You allow this person to guide you through the process, and you trust that person, even if teachers that you've never come across before. But it's kind of by default, you give yourself to the mat and to the guide. There's a certain trust you put in there by default. And for that person to suddenly turn around and go, is it okay if I touch you? There's something slightly, I understand they're being very considerate, and also to a certain extent make sure they don't get sued if something should happen. But for me, that wasn't a very healthy development for yoga classes, I don't think. I understand people are worried that they're going to be accused of sexual harassment. But to be honest, if you think about it in a grander scale of things, there are only these two guys that we know of kind of blatantly just abuse people. For these two bad apples to ruin the whole thing, I think it would be such a shame. For me, it's going to be a kind of work in progress. But I felt that I would be someone who would be quite physical in a sense, in terms of adjustment, because I know the benefit of it. I think physical adjustment could be a very powerful thing and quite healing, really, because we tend to be polite and considerate, and or even fearful of close contact other than people who really, really know. So being touched by someone who don't really know, there's something that we are not used to. And I would say it's one of the great things about yoga is about dissolving that wall. Well, it doesn't mean you open yourself up for potential abuse. Allowing the kind of physical walls between us to kind of fade away, and understanding that we're not just one individual, we're all together. And the word yoga means union. It means people coming together. I don't mean instead of touching each other, but allowing that wall to come down. And it makes you freer as a person. It makes you kinder to people, because you understand that you doesn't stop here. All the people around you and everything else is an extension of yourself. You're not just this thing, single entity. The physical adjustment literally made me remember certain corrections that's perhaps not really effective verbally. Anything that's verbal has to go to your brain, you have to interpret it, and you might interpret it in different ways. But physical adjustment is just that. It kind of helps you to remember it with your body rather than with your brain. And it's a very, very powerful thing. So I think physical adjustment will probably continue to be slightly sensitive for some teachers. But I like to kind of just look at it as part of yoga practice or teaching, because I think it could potentially help and heal so many people. Another thing I had to kind of put in with a bit more effort is learning Sanskrit. As I said, I have been going to yoga classes for quite a long time. Obviously, the Sanskrits I just kind of know by heart, like Chaturanga Dandasana or Shavasana, the favorite bit of the yoga class, which is resting. But to be honest, most of them I didn't really make any effort to remember and didn't really think there was need for it. I think from the course's point of view, in terms of a course that's training future yoga teachers, they do put a lot of emphasis on learning Sanskrit. I think from the course's point of view, as a qualified teacher, you need to be fluent in Sanskrit and be able to just throw a few here and there as you give out the verbal cues. To a certain extent, I kind of agree, but at the same time, again, I'm drawing from my own experience practicing yoga as a practitioner. To be honest, I never felt that Sanskrit is kind of enhancing or detracting from my experience. It's kind of just there. A majority of teachers who use Sanskrit, very often they will say something in Sanskrit and then immediately follow it with English. So they say Trikonasana, they will go triangle pose, right? So it's not a problem. But occasionally you have teachers that really use a lot of Sanskrit, but not really explaining what they are. Again, this is my personal view on this. I felt that teachers who do not use plain language and pretty much Sanskrit exclusively, those are not the teachers I tend to follow, because I think on one hand you can say, well, they're really well read, well studied, and they're fluent in this amazing ancient language. But at the same time, if you do not explain in English, for me that simply means that you do not care if I understand it. As simple as that. So Sanskrit is kind of interesting one. It would be interesting to know how much Sanskrit I'll be using when I teach. I suspect probably not that much. I like to think the most important thing with the verbal cue is so you understand what I'm asking of you to do, so you can do it safely, correctly. Not so much to impress you with a beautiful language. I think, they're quite beautiful, Sanskrit. I frequently listen to songs that's kind of sung in Sanskrit. I don't know what they mean, but it doesn't matter. It just sounds nice. But when you were teaching a class, I think it's probably close to irresponsible if you just use Sanskrit alone, unless you're teaching some sort of master class. You just know everybody knows what you're talking about. Because what's the point of verbal cue? The verbal cue is so you understand what I'm talking about. Let me just show you how we're learning these. So we're given like a stack of cards like these. So you'll have poses on one side, and on the other side, the flip side, you get the breakdown of how to pronounce it, the Sanskrit, how to spell it, and what it is, and there's English down there as well. And we have a whole bunch of these. I'm just starting learning them, and so my goal is to kind of memorize one a day, so I don't get mixed up with things. So this is extended side angle. So this is Palavita Pashva Konasana. So you kind of it breaks down individual bits. So there will be bits in common like revolving is Palavita. So anything that's got revolved kind of action is Palavita. I'm sure, if you're an Indian person, you probably think that my pronunciation is absolutely terrible. So we have a whole stack of things to learn bit by bit. And we also, on top of the cards, we also have access to an app that actually teaches you how to pronounce it. So you have a whole list of poses here. It's based on sort of Ashtanga poses, a primary series. So you pick one like the one I've just showed you.
Parivritta Parshva Konasana.
Parivritta Parshva Konasana. So this is what I do all day now. Whenever I get like 3 seconds, I just pull out one pose and try to remember it. So it's kind of fun. And I think it is helpful to know a bit of kind of history of it and know the language. But deep down, I think I know that it probably doesn't hinder your experience of yoga, even if you don't know any Sanskrit. But as a teacher, I have to learn these things. So it's a compromise, right? It's a compromise. So as I said, I'm really pleased with the course so far in terms of how fast we progress. I think it's much better to be thrown in deep ends. So this is the kind of start I like. We just throw in the middle of it and start teaching it. So I'm really excited for the next session, and I hope I'll get a place for the 4 months course. If not, I'll just stay 1 year. It's not the end of the world. But I hope I'll be able to get a place for the 4 months course. It means I'll be able to go back to it every weekend. And how great is that? And also another thing is what I find. So our training course is like 9 in the morning and till 6, back to back 2 days. And when it comes to food, I kind of notice everybody around me is eating all the time. So we have 3 breaks throughout the day. So 9 o'clock we start, we do the asana. And then we have a break, mid-morning, and then lunch break for 1 hour. And then we have afternoon break at around, I think, 3 o'clock or something, or 4 o'clock. And everybody was just snacking away, literally. There are people snacking on pastries and on donuts and crisps. But what I decided to do was to fast through these sessions. So the 4 training days I've done so far, I fasted through pretty much all of them. So obviously, each day I come home in the evening, I eat something, 1 meal a day, and then I'll fast till next day, till the end of the training session. And it worked magically. It worked phenomenally well. I had tons of energy. I never felt hungry. So, obviously we're in the beginning of the courses, everybody's trying to get to know each other. So at lunchtime, say, Fan, do you want to grab some lunch? And I said, well, okay, I'll come for coffee. And then they realized I don't eat. And they were so shocked. They say, how do you get energy? They go, well, did you have a big breakfast? And I said, well, I didn't have breakfast. I had some coffee. I had coffee throughout the day. I said, do you not get hungry? And this is when it gets really difficult, because how do you explain fasting to people who have no idea, how it works, or even keto and stuff like that. So I kind of, saying that I try to cut carbohydrate and stuff, and I do intermittent fasting sometimes, and they just couldn't believe what they were hearing. They said, well, how could you possibly have energy to cope with whole day's training and then not eating anything? So this is what I call keto power, or fasting power, is the less you eat, the more energy you have. What a paradox. So it's worked really well, and so the training days actually naturally allows me to sort of fast for longer period of time, and I felt great. Even by 5 o'clock, I feel totally alert. Mentally, you have to be so sharp because there's so much to take in. And I feel fantastic. I mean, obviously, by end of the day, I was exhausted because, as soon as you walk out of the studio, go, that's 1 day done. But that's probably the more mental thing. But physically, I feel great. So I'm just so grateful that I actually learned about ketogenic diet. I learned about fasting, because these are just amazing tools. And it makes you so much more free, because the people around me, they were eating all the time, but they're still saying they're hungry. And also by the afternoon, because they ate so much at lunchtime and also at breaks, they are so sluggish. And, when you have to do physical stuff, they just so weighed down and didn't enjoy it very much. So I think fasting just going to really work for me on training days. So these are the things I wanted to share with you. I mean, I'm really, really excited. I'm so glad that I chose to do this. I'm dying to learn everything. Also, I'm keeping up the 6 to 7 day practice a week. I think we're recommended to do 6 days, but I find sometimes my body wants it, so I do 7 days. And occasionally I have 1 day I do go to a class that's more in yoga type of thing. But my body feels great, and it's getting stronger. So it's just all good, all fantastic. And I hope one day, not too far away in the future, I'll be able to meet some of you through yoga. And at some point, I'd like to start sharing sort of yoga with you in terms of, maybe yoga for backache, and if you're in front of a computer all the time, or some morning routines, etc., that makes you feel more alert and feel better. But I think just figuring out some way in my flat that I'm able to do that. So, I need to work out how I can set it up so I'm able to do sort of to provide some yoga content for you. Let me know what you think. Maybe some of you are looking to embark on a similar journey as well. So thank you for hanging out with me today. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I would like to do more chats like this with you. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.